Ezekiel chapters 45 through 46. When you divide the land by lot as an inheritance, set aside a donation to the Lord, a holy portion of the land, 8 1/3 miles long and 6 2/3 miles wide. This entire region will be holy. In this area, there will be a square section for the sanctuary, 875 by 875 feet, with 87.5 feet of open space all around it. From this holy portion, you will measure off an area 8 1/3 miles long and 3 1/3 miles wide, in which the sanctuary, the most holy place, will stand. It will be a holy area of the land to be used by the priests who minister in the sanctuary, who approach to serve the Lord. It will be a place for their houses, as well as a holy area for the sanctuary. There will be another area, 8 1/3 miles long and 3 1/3 miles wide, for the Levites who minister in the temple. It will be their possession for towns to live in. As the property of the city, set aside an area 1 2/3 miles wide and 8 1/3 miles long, adjacent to the holy donation of land. It will be for the whole house of Israel, and the prince will have the area on each side of the holy donation of land, and the city's property adjacent to the holy donation, and the city's property stretching to the west on the west side and to the east on the east side. Its length will correspond to one of the tribal portions, from the western boundary to the eastern boundary. This will be his land as a possession in Israel. My princes will no longer oppress my people, but give the rest of the land to the house of Israel according to their tribes. This is what the Lord God says. You have gone too far, princes of Israel. Put away violence and oppression, and do what is just and right. Put an end to your evictions of my people. This is the declaration of the Lord God. You are to have honest scales, an honest dry measure, and an honest liquid measure. The dry measure and the liquid measure will be uniform, with the liquid measure containing 5.5 gallons, and the dry measure holding half a bushel. Their measurement will be 1/10 of the standard larger capacity measure. The shekel will weigh 20 gerahs. Your mina will equal 60 shekels. This is the contribution you are to offer: 3 quarts from 6 bushels of wheat, and 3 quarts from 6 bushels of barley. The quota of oil in liquid measures will be 1% of every core. The core equals 10 liquid measures, or 1 standard larger capacity measure, since 10 liquid measures equal 1 standard larger capacity measure. And the quota from the flock is 1 animal out of every 200 from the well-watered pastures of Israel. These are for the grain offerings, burnt offerings, and fellowship offerings, to make atonement for the people. This is the declaration of the Lord God. All the people of the land must take part in this contribution for the prince in Israel. Then the burnt offerings, grain offerings, and drink offerings for the festivals, new moons, and Sabbaths, for all the appointed times of the house of Israel, will be the prince's responsibility. He will provide the sin offerings, grain offerings, burnt offerings, and fellowship offerings to make atonement on behalf of the house of Israel. This is what the Lord God says. In the first month, on the first day of the month, you are to take a young unblemished bull and purify the sanctuary. The priest is to take some of the blood from the sin offering and apply it to the temple doorposts, the 4 corners of the altar's ledge, and the doorposts of the gate of the inner court. You are to do the same thing on the 7th day of the month for everyone who sins unintentionally or through ignorance. In this way, you will make atonement for the temple. In the first month, on the 13th day of the month, you are to celebrate the Passover, a festival of 7 days, during which unleavened bread will be eaten. On that day the prince will provide a bull as a sin offering on behalf of himself and all the people of the land. During the 7 days of the festival he will provide 7 bulls and 7 rams without blemish as a burnt offering to the Lord on each of the 7 days, along with a male goat each day for a sin offering. He will also provide a grain offering of half a bushel per bull and half a bushel per ram, along with a gallon of oil for every half bushel. At the festival that begins on the 15th day of the 7th month, he will provide the same things for 7 days, the same sin offerings, burnt offerings, grain offerings, and oil. This is what the Lord God says: the gate of the inner court that faces east to be closed during the 6 days of work, but it will be opened on the Sabbath day and opened on the day of the new moon. The prince should enter from the outside by way of the gate's portico and stand at the gate's doorposts, while the priests sacrifice his burnt offerings and fellowship offerings. He will bow in worship at the gate's threshold and then depart, but the gate is not to be closed until evening. The people of the land will also bow in worship before the Lord at the entrance of that gate on the Sabbath and new moons. The burnt offering that the prince presents to the Lord on the Sabbath day is to be 6 unblemished lambs and an unblemished ram. The grain offering will be half a bushel with the ram, and the grain offering with the lambs will be whatever he wants to give, as well as a gallon of oil for every half bushel. On the day of the new moon, the burnt offering is to be a young, unblemished bull, as well as 6 lambs and a ram without blemish. He will provide a grain offering of half a bushel with the bull, half a bushel with the ram, and whatever he can afford with the lambs, together with a gallon of oil for every half bushel. When the prince enters, he is to go in by way of the gate's portico and go out the same way. When the people of the land come before the Lord at the appointed times, whoever enters by way of the north gate to worship is to go out by way of the south gate, and whoever enters by way of the south gate is to go out by way of the north gate. No one may return through the gate by which he entered, but is to go out by the opposite gate. When the people enter, the prince will enter with them, and when they leave, he will leave. At the festivals and appointed times, the grain offerings will be half a bushel with the bull, half a bushel with the ram, and whatever he wants to give with the lambs, along with a gallon of oil for every half bushel. When the prince makes a free will offering, whether a burnt offering or a fellowship offering, as a free will offering to the Lord, the gate that faces east is to be open for him. He is to offer his burnt offering or fellowship offering, just as he does on the Sabbath day. Then he will go out, and the gate is to be closed after he leaves. You are to offer an unblemished year-old male lamb as a daily burnt offering to the Lord. You will offer it every morning. You are also to prepare a grain offering every morning along with it, 3 quarts with 1/3 of a gallon of oil, to moisten the fine flour, a grain offering to the Lord. This is the permanent statute to be observed regularly. They will offer the lamb, the grain offering, and the oil every morning as a regular burnt offering. This is what the Lord God says: if the prince gives a gift to each of his sons as their inheritance, it will belong to his sons. It will become their property by inheritance. But if he gives a gift from his inheritance to one of his servants, it will belong to that servant until the year of freedom, when it will revert to the prince. His inheritance belongs only to his sons. It is theirs. The prince must not take any of the people's inheritance, evicting them from their property. He is to provide an inheritance for his sons from his own property, so that none of my people will be displaced from his own property. Then he brought me through the entrance that was at the side of the gate into the priest's holy chambers, which faced north. I saw a place there at the far western end. He said to me, "This is the place where the priests will boil the guilt offering and the sin offering, and where they will bake the grain offering, so that they do not bring them into the outer court and transmit holiness to the people." Next, he brought me into the outer court and led me past its four corners. There was a separate court in each of its corners. In the four corners of the outer court, there were enclosed courts, 70 feet long by 52.5 feet wide. All four corner areas had the same dimensions. There was a stone wall around the inside of them, around the four of them, with ovens built at the base of the walls on all sides. He said to me, "These are the kitchens where those who minister at the temple will cook the people's sacrifices."